Hello everyone. You know I had to do it with the soy face in the thumbnail because it's happened. There he is, the man, the myth, the legend. Alex O'Connor has officially come out and recited the Shahada. So today we're going to be looking at his little video about how, about why he's a Christian now. Title of the video is Atheist Slogans You Should Stop Using. So we're going to basically just say, oh, is this actually a bad slogan? Is this a good slogan? Do we think it's, what are our criticisms? So I'll drop the meme and just say, I'm an evangelical Christian, but I'm a fan of Alex. I think he makes some good videos. And I do think there are definitely atheist slogans that they should stop using. So I'll see how much I agree with Alex's assessment on these slogans being bad. We're going to have to be kind of like, I know we might have to jump through this video, skip some stuff, just because obviously... it's a very long video, and I don't want to just be, either I react in detail, in which case it takes ages, or I hardly react at all, and we just try and get through the video as fast as possible, but in that case, I'm kind of wasting time, so let's see.
Popular these episodes seem to be. People like overviews, they like lists, they like comparisons, they like...
Hey, Zach.
Sort of, I don't know what it is about these videos, but people seem to really like them, so I'm glad to have you back today.
I'm glad to be back. I mean, I think it's just because I'm, overwhelmingly sexy. That's the only explanation. The women are just, swooning. Even the guys are swooning. The straight guys are swooning, in fact. That's what happens every time I come on.
I'm sure that people in the comments will let us know, and now, since we said this, there will...
See, the problem is, saying the straight guys are swooning is implying you look like a girl. Hey, Blake. My name's Blake.
TikTok edits of these comments, so edit away. We're here today to discuss some of the
Hey, why does he have an Arsenal Football Club thing when he's American? I wonder why.
Most popular atheist or counter-religion, counter-apologetic slogans. And this was your idea, because I wanted to do another episode with you, and you said, hey, how about this?
I don't believe I can turn... Oh, wait, I can turn the video up. Sorry,
I don't know about you, but...
There we go. Yes.
All the time on the internet, not just in comment sections and stuff, but I see videos. It's either people making videos on social media, or it's clips of someone like Ricky Gervais, and they've got the...
I don't know, there's this video I've seen before of these Americans who are getting really excited about Brentford FC, and it just it lives in my head rent free, because I'm just why are they so into Brentford? I feel like I have the video on my phone, on my computer, but I don't know how exactly I would show you it, because it's so I'm not going to bother, but I think somewhere I have it. It's these kids who are just they go down to the local sports bar in upstate New York to watch Brentford play football.
These kinds of one-liners, and you're seeing people say oh, well, I just believe in one God less than you do. Or it's the
one God fewer.
Gervais thing went viral kind of recently, right? Of if all the books were burned in the world, the science ones would come back and the religion ones wouldn't come back. And it's they've turned into these slogans that atheists...
Yeah, and by the way, so far I'll just say both of those arguments are bad. I think the only issue is, and why this is going to be redundant, clickbaiting won't get you an audience. I know, but you know what will get me an audience is being hilarious, which is... If you actually go to the start of the video, you'll hear me say that Alex O'Connor is about to recite the Shahada. So, actually go to the start of the video. Okay, that was me just confirming that my audio actually works. Also, by the way, one of the reasons for this is that my initial reason for why I found this video is that was actually the title of this video I saw by an atheist who was kind of crying about very salty about Alex O'Connor having made this video. I thought it would be... I was that's fun.
To use all the time. Now, look, I don't believe in God. I think you don't believe in God, at least the last time I checked you didn't. And I think some of these slogans work, some of them don't. So today, let's go through as many as we can do in a reasonable amount of time and see if we should keep using them. How's it sound?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, I mean, these are often used as thought-terminating cliches, but or mic drop moments. So
so I suppose what I'll do, just so this isn't entirely redundant, is I'll give my arguments against the claims. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, actually. Yeah, I'll give my arguments, just so you're not just watching me react to these guys, and then we'll see what arguments they're giving. And if they're giving basically the same arguments, then I'll skip to the next one. I think that would be a good way of doing this.
See if we have any mic drop moments in defense of them, or maybe in responding to them. We'll see. I'm sure we'll have some.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay, well, let's start with a claim. Which is it Carl Sagan who first said this? It was someone like that. I think it might have been Sagan who said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
Okay, so I actually made a criticism. I, of course, recently made a world-famous video about why I'm not an atheist. It was the 5 reasons I'm not an atheist. And one of the reasons I presented was atheism's epistemological issue. And one of the things I explicitly criticized by name was this idea that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The problem with that statement is that it makes atheism, or naturalism perhaps we should say more specifically, unfalsifiable, because you can always just say that a supernatural event is so extraordinary that no amount of evidence for it could ever be extraordinary enough. Because of course, this is the problem you have. You'll get people who will say, well, whatever evidence there is that's given for God, whatever evidence there is that's given for the resurrection or anything else, it is always more likely that I have gone insane, that everyone around me's gone insane, that there's aliens who have hacked our brains, that we're living in some kind of matrix. There are always more explanations that could be naturalistic. And because they'll say, well, we have evidence of the natural existing. We have evidence of sophisticated computers. We have evidence of AI. We have evidence of other planets, and maybe there's aliens on those planets. We have all of this reason to think it could be other stuff. And therefore, since we've never encountered any evidence for the supernatural, it would have to be something really extraordinary to be considered evidence for the supernatural. What you'll notice there, the problem is, that's inescapable, right? That's an inescapable bind. Because now, nothing you can do will ever provide evidence. If your main reason for rejecting evidence for a particular phenomena is that we've never seen evidence of that thing before, and therefore that thing is so extraordinary that any evidence for it would have to be especially extraordinary, well then you are never ever going to accept that thing, right? Because you're just going to keep rejecting all of the evidence given, saying it's not extraordinary enough because we haven't had any evidence for it before, and therefore we've got no reason to believe it exists. It's the thing, like, and I've had people say all sorts of crazy things, like, in order to provide evidence for God, you'd first of all have to prove that God is possible. It's like, what do you mean prove that God is possible? Yeah, just I think, hello Esther Benito. Yeah, that's my criticism basically. So I've laid it out. That's why I think this whole extraordinary. And the thing is, there is an underlying logic to it. Obviously, I have to provide more evidence for the claim that I don't know, met Taylor Swift than that I had oats for breakfast this morning, or eggs for breakfast this morning, or that I went for a walk today. And the reason for that is because me having met Taylor Swift would be kind of unlikely. There's, that's not something you would expect to have been the case because whatever. Whereas obviously someone eating eggs for breakfast in the morning, that's a very common thing. That's quite a typical breakfast food. So you wouldn't really need to provide evidence. You'd just be willing to believe that. So in some sense, yes, it is true. It's almost a truism to say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, in that, yeah, obviously the more typical and expected something is, the less evidence you're likely to demand of it, whereas the more outlandish claims, you're probably going to expect more evidence. The issue, though, is when this is taken to the extreme of applying to supernatural claims from a naturalistic perspective, where from that naturalistic perspective, supernatural claims are so extraordinary that you can just dismiss any evidence by saying it's not extraordinary enough.
That's claim one. And I think it's because, a lot of the religious claims that people make are pretty sort of out there. People rising from the dead, supernatural interventions into the world, and people like to say, well, we've got evidence for these things. But for a lot of atheists, it's maybe you can't say, oh, well, you don't have any evidence at all for this kind of stuff, but it isn't really doing it for me. And this is supposed to capture that kind of feeling, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Sagan talks about not only about religion, but also, like alien abductions. I remember watching.
I'm gonna have to go get some water real quick because I'm thirsty. I'm powerful thirsty. I also somehow have 2 mugs in my room and a plate, so I don't know how I managed that, but... grapes were on sale at the grocery store today, so I got some. And I'm just... Oh, hello. Why is that happening? Let me fiddle. Wait. I'll play the video and then I'll fiddle.
A video when I was in my new atheist phase of Carl Sagan talking about aliens. And he's just noting that like these claims maybe seem to like be antecedently quite improbable. They run very contrary to our ordinary humdrum experience, to the way we generally know the world to operate. And when you have claims like that, it seems like you need some pretty strong evidence in order to believe them. Maybe he would cash out extraordinary in some way other than pretty strong evidence, but I think that's maybe the most charitable interpretation here.
Hey, Clues.
I mean, we actually might not get sparks flying for this one, because like I think there's
Annette, hello, Dark, Dungy, Ranji. I'll answer your question in a moment.
a very charitable reading of this slogan, which is just like clearly correct. I don't know about you. But...
Well, I've heard people say in response to this, like, no, extraordinary claims just require ordinary evidence, right? Like, if your sort of epistemological standards are such that I require, X amount of evidence to believe in a claim, I guess there's something about, like, the prior probability of the claim which makes us want to, like, heighten the amount of evidence needed.
Hello, Thuigo Mesa. I'll respond to your question, Dark, Dundry, Ojianji, when I've moved on to the next... once I moved on to the next argument, just so I've, like, actually made some progress.
So technically speaking, we might be saying something like, if the prior probability of the thing that you're claiming is much lower, like at least according to my assessment, then the like amount or strength of evidence goes up. But there is a response to this which sort of says, I don't know, like should we not just say that if there is evidence for something to be the case, then there's evidence for it to be the case? And
yeah, okay, so Alex and I are pretty much on the same point, which is that obviously I used to be an atheist. And one of the big things in me becoming Christian was realizing, hold on a minute, I do have this standard where I'm kind of saying, because I haven't seen any evidence for the supernatural so far, I've therefore concluded the supernatural is so impossible that I have this really high standard of evidence I'm requiring. But I thought, well, actually, let's just take a minute to kind of recalibrate what is an actual reasonable standard to be holding the supernatural to. Once you kind of take off the table the fact that I'm kind of going into it with this assumption of, well, I haven't seen any evidence so far, therefore I think it's such an improbable claim, therefore I'm holding it to this unreasonably high standard. And basically what I kind of realized at that point was that the Bible had already met the standard I was looking for. So yeah, I think we're kind of coming at this from the same sense of recognizing actually there is a sense in which you have to be like, no, you've just got a standard, and once something provides enough evidence to meet that standard, yeah, well done. Done.
That evidence leads us to something kind of like wacky or extraordinary, so be it. It's the same, amount of evidence that convinces us of some other claims, so why should we have to change? Do you think that the strength of a piece of evidence, in other words, actually like varies with the like weirdness of the claim? After all, the weirdness of the thing that we're trying to prove here is kind of a product of us and our credulity. It's not like
exactly.
If it's just
that's a really good point. Yeah,
miracles occur in the universe, then that's just
like that's the thing. You are in some sense constructing your own sense of extraordinariness, right? Because let's suppose that I said I was just going to refuse to accept any evidence for evolution, for example. Well, based on the fact that I would say I haven't seen any evidence for it, I would conclude it's a really extraordinary claim. I say, I've never seen any evidence for it, therefore it's extraordinary. The problem is, then any evidence you show me, I'd be like, well, that's not extraordinary. Like, okay, maybe it's okay. Okay, you got the fossil records, you got blah, blah, blah. But it's not extraordinary. And therefore, I'll just keep on thinking forever, well, I've not seen any evidence for it. You can make this even more absurd. You could say, like, I refuse to believe in the existence of other planets. And then you show me a sign, and you show me through a telescope, oh, look, there's another planet. And I'll say, yeah, but I've never seen any evidence for this planet before. So the fact there's like a whole other planet, that's a pretty extraordinary claim. I don't know if just seeing that planet through a telescope, it could be anything. Like, that's the reality. If you're going into it having already refused to accept the claim, then you can already just say, well, that claim's so extraordinary, I've never seen evidence for it, I've never seen any reason to believe it before. And then you can just say, well, based on that, your standard for extraordinary evidence is going to be really high.
Fact, like any other fact, right? The only thing that makes it extraordinary is that we as people are a bit more incredulous to that kind of thing. But that doesn't change that it's just a fact in the universe that has evidence in favor of it. See what I'm saying?
Okay, I think we'll move on because they're not spending that long in this section anyway, and I think it would be worth... Okay.
Which I think is a good segue into our second
Yes.
and perhaps more interesting.
So they did seem to get through that quite quickly, and this one's huge, right? This section, there is no evidence for God. They talk about this for a while, so yeah. I will address your question, person whose name I've still not... I'll just call you Doc. Doc, do you? I know you aren't Catholic, but do you give anything up for Lent? I feel it is a nice way to make a sacrifice to show your devotion. So short answer is no. I am real. This whole like giving up a specific thing. I think it certainly does have benefits. I'm not sure of anything meaningful that I could give up right now. In terms of like, a lot of the things that I could give up would be things that wouldn't be that hard for me to give up anyway. And the stuff that would be hard for me to give up is stuff that I don't think it would be practical for me to give up. Like, I don't know, I could give up driving my car, but that would just be annoying. It means I couldn't go to church. Whatever. Anyway. Or like I could give up meat, but then it's kind of like I'd have to come up with this whole new elaborate diet. There's loads of things. But I mean, yeah, the real answer there is even if I were to give something up, I wouldn't give something up to correspond to Lent because I think that would just communicate the wrong message and kind of make it seem like I'm on board with... Because even though obviously, you can, there's no reason why a Christian can't just... Like you can, I could choose to give something up for Ramadan. But yeah, for Ramadan, of course Ramadan's happening right now. But the problem is that would give kind of the impression that I accept the religious underpinnings, even if I don't. Because, yeah, like I say, as a Christian, I could just give up anything whenever I want, whenever. But, obviously, if you give up at a specific time. Yeah, I don't... For me, like, fasting is something that I have never had that much interest in as a means of, I don't know, spiritual... Transcendence. Transcendence is probably a bit of a new agey sounding term. But, there are people who talk about like fasting, like, oh, yes, it's a really incredible experience. But personally, I have never once in my life thought that, I feel like there's so many other things I could do before I stopped eating to achieve something.
Claim, which is this. There is no evidence for God. I'm not taking these in order, by the way. I've got your Google Doc, but I'm moving them around as I see fit. There is no evidence for God. As Hitchens says, religion provides nothing. People say this all the time. Like when you ask people online, like, why are you an atheist?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. I said I should respond to, I'll tell you what my response is. So yeah, basically the thing here is obviously there is evidence for God. The question is it good evidence? And, it does annoy me when people say, oh, you haven't provided any evidence for something. I'm like, well, no, I have provided evidence, but this is the evidence. And based on the fact of providing evidence, you have to show that this evidence is bad. So even if I tell you my evidence is my personal experience, you have to have a conversation now about, well, why is that not good evidence? Because you can't just say it's not evidence, right? So, yeah, for me, this just seems blatantly false to say there's no evidence. Obviously, you can say there's not enough evidence to sufficiently convince you. And, yeah, specifically, I think there's that aspect of when people will use this claim that there is no evidence for God as a way to avoid having to engage with any of the evidence that's being provided. Because, yeah, to me that's just very common. That I'll give arguments, people say, oh, you haven't provided any actual evidence. I'm like, well, the arguments I provided are evidence, and the fact that you're dismissing them as evidence rather than engaging with them and showing why they're bad evidence, to me suggests that actually it's good evidence because you're so resistant to arguing against it.
What's your evidence for atheism? They say it's not really like that. It's more that there's no evidence for the thing that you're claiming. Do you think that's true?
No. So, like,
yeah.
What is evidence? Evidence, at least as lots of philosophers understand it, is some piece of information that raises the probability of a hypothesis.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to... Like, it's interesting they talk about this for so long, because I don't know exactly how much there is to get out of this. When you look... It is interesting to me how up and down the little thing that showed you... Like, for some reason, nobody watched this section. Like, if you look at the little waveforms that show you how viewed each section is, like here, just everyone drops off. I don't know why. Yeah, I'll watch a little bit, but I'm kind of thinking, I don't really know how much they can say here, because I feel like you kind of just touched it there, right? Evidence is anything that makes something more likely true than not. And within that context, like, even someone just telling you something that happened to them is evidence, even if it's just not very convincing evidence.
And like, if your hypothesis gets a boost in light of certain information, then that information is evidence for the hypothesis.
Can I ask a question about that definition? Because that's really helpful, right? We need to define what counts as evidence. And that seems reasonable. Like, okay, you said something like, say it again, the definition of evidence?
Yeah, so in slogan form, which is fitting, evidence is probability raising. So it's just, evidence is information that raises the probability of a hypothesis.
Okay, so, but I wonder, like, is there a counterexample to this that would seem a little sort of weird? Like, I mean, if I said... I've got this hypothesis that there have been alien abductions, and if there had been alien abductions, then, I don't know, maybe there would be some geopolitical influence, like the government would start focusing on that. And
yeah, I think the interesting thing there, Dominic, is I would say like two things. One, and I'm not necessarily trying to discount you, I would say, one, it is interesting, this question of like, how do you do this when... you have kind of a family life. And the second thing is obviously the fact that the apostles were heads of a church. Like, they were very high up in a church situation. The issue I have is I feel like I would be less able to function in terms of day-to-day life if I was fasting. And I wouldn't want to impose that on really the only person that matters right now, which is my wife. Like, if I said, oh... I'm really not going to be able to do as much today in terms of like physical activity or whatever because I'm fasting, because I'm like making this effort to not eat food or whatever. To me, that seems inappropriate. I think, I don't know. It's one of those things where I feel like normalcy is actually pretty good for living day-to-day life. And really, it would be during moments of particular religious... I don't know, experience or seeking that out, that you would make a point of fasting, which of course in the case of the apostles, it makes sense that was something they were doing all the time. Like, I've never really had such a huge spiritual issue that, obviously you say, well, we've all got like big spiritual issues in some sense, we're all sinners, blah, blah, blah. But I never really had like this big thing that I'm like really concerned with, that I felt compelled to fast over. Whereas, of course, I'd imagine if you're someone who does not have a wife, does not have kids, like, for example, Jesus, and of course, Paul, or you're someone who is literally a minister, you're really involved in the church such that it's your main job, then you'd be fasting. Of course, I mean, the question could be, who knows, maybe one day, if God willing, this channel really takes off, and the main thing I'm doing in terms of making ends meet and making a living is... doing this channel. Maybe at that point, based on what I've just said then, I would have to start considering fasting, because at that point I would have to say, well, the majority of what I'm doing in my life is supposed to be God-centered. Whereas right now, there's just so many other things I'm doing in terms of living my life day to day, that the idea of taking a whole load of time out to not consume sufficient calories is pretty crazy.
Things would start going badly else.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's also that, I don't want to like make too many excuses, there's also the fact like I have like a lot of anxiety issues around food, so that's just another thing, which is basically anyone. I'm a very, what's the word? I'm a creature of habit. I don't like it. It's strange to me that there are people who kind of don't have a sleeping schedule. People who just like I remember I actually was on a church retreat. I was sharing a room with another guy, and one night he went to bed at 1 a.m. got up at 5:30 in the morning. The next night, went to bed at 9, got up at 7. It was just like, it was all over the place, and I was really confused. I was like, that's so strange, because me, it's like I go to bed at 10:30 pretty much, and I wake up at 6:40. And like there's a lot of consistency there, and it actually very much throws me off when that isn't the case. So the idea, and like it's kind of a similar thing with my meals. Like when I find that I'm getting delayed of eating a meal, I'm like, oh, I just feel really off. Whatever. I think I probably have ADHD. Like that's and I know people say, oh, ADHD. Like I know, like for me, like I don't use like ADHD as an excuse to be lazy, but I do think that I massively fall off the rails in terms of managing my life when I don't maintain a really strict schedule.
Swear. And look, like, you know, the government is shutting down or whatever, and therefore I've got this evidence of alien abductions. In theory, you know, that evidence is kind of predicted on my hypothesis, and that evidence is, you know, forthcoming, but it would seem a little bit too loose to say that counts as evidence for alien abductions.
Why not? I mean, it's just weak evidence, right? And it's evidence that's significantly overcome by countervailing evidence, right? So I don't really feel the intuitive pull of saying that that's no evidence whatsoever, because...
Okay, I'm going to see what Alex says in response, otherwise I'm going to skip. Because so far I'm pretty much just of the position that, yeah, it is evidence, it just might not be especially persuasive evidence. I like the way that this guy just put it.
After all, I mean, the hypothesis is boosted by it. I mean, listen, there are kind of philosophical challenges to this. I recognize that. But I would just want to diffuse those intuitions by saying, I'm not saying it's conclusive evidence. I'm not saying it's evidence sufficient to believe the claim in question or the hypothesis in question. I'm only saying that it is at least some potentially weak evidence in favor of the hypothesis. It's at least some reason to think that the hypothesis is true. Maybe it's an overwhelmingly weak reason. Maybe it only boosts the probability of the hypothesis from 1 in a trillion to 1 in a billion. But I take that to be just some evidence, because otherwise, you know, the hypothesis was super duper unlikely, and you just made it much more likely. You gave us some more reason to think that it's true than we previously had.
I think when we start saying things like, okay, technically this is evidence, it's just really, really, really weak evidence, right? This is kind of a line of defense, actually. If someone says there's no evidence for God, it's like, no, there is evidence, it's just not very good. But surely there comes a point when the evidence is like so bad that basically, again, like rhetorically, you can just say there's no evidence. Because like, if you press...
Yeah, I suppose the only question here would be, do we think the evidence for God is super bad? And my position is no. And I didn't even think the evidence for God was super bad even when I was an atheist, right? I think that, you know, I'm not going to get into all the evidence for God that I think there is. In fact, yeah, I think I will just skip at this point on to the next claim, because again, we want to get through this with a reasonable degree of... And, you know, again, I don't just want to spend this entire time basically just responding to Alex's video so much that I'm pretty much just almost... You know, not stealing, but, you know, like if I spend way too long just showing you all of Alex's video, I will feel like I'm being a bit of a pilfer. Is that an expression? I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, I will just say that I do think there is evidence for God that is better than just really, really, really bad evidence. Obviously, I mean, well, that kind of goes without saying, because from my perspective, I'm now someone who believes it. But like I say, even when I was an atheist, I would say that... if someone is being intellectually honest as an atheist, they should recognize, you know, there is actually some good reason to believe in God. I think that the cosmological argument is something that has to be wrestled with. And I don't think if the argument actually warrants even being discussed, and I think it does, even the teleological argument, which I don't love, but I do think that it warrants having a serious conversation about. If you're an atheist, you should take a second to actually think, ooh, you know, what do I think about, like, fine-tuning? How did the world get the way it is? You can't, like, if you're an atheist, obviously you will then conclude, oh, I don't actually think the evidence is that good. But I don't think you can say that the evidence is so bad that it qualifies as no evidence at all if you've actually had to engage with it. So, yeah, whatever. I think we will now skip to the next section, not because I don't think Alex... Okay, not because I don't think that Alex would have lots of interesting things to say, but yeah, like I say, just because I don't want to make it so it's just him saying interesting things and I'm kind of stealing his efforts.
Which is, who created God?
Okay,
who designed the designer?
Bad argument, right? I think this is such a terrible argument. It's so weird. You can literally explain in detail what... So, you know, my typical presentation of the cosmological argument is I say, look, all of natural science let's put the stress on my face. All of natural science is based on the fact the natural world is causal. Everything we observe in the natural world has some kind of natural antecedent cause, and therefore we have to ask what caused the first natural thing. That's the question we should ask. And the obvious answer is that it would have to be something supernatural. And the reason it would have to be something supernatural is because that would be the only thing to which the rules we observe about the natural world do not apply. That's kind of like the stupid thing, in my view, about the whole who created God. The whole argument, if you just like listen for a second, the entire argument for like the cosmological position is that God is the best explanation for something that wouldn't have needed something to create him. You know, something I always say also is that the natural world is made up of space and time, and therefore you cannot have there had to have been a beginning point for the universe, because you can't have an infinite number of past events. However, God is outside of space and time, so he could just have existed forever. He wouldn't need. He can be without beginning, without end, because he is not part of the natural world. He exists outside of space and time. Obviously, when he came into the natural world in the incarnation, then he was briefly in space and time. But again, that's the point, right? He kind of condescended. The uncaused cause, right? Like that's kind of almost, you could say, what God is. Well, it's not necessarily the definition of what God is, but like the argument for, and it kind of seems like so stupid, right? Because it's kind of like you could almost ask, if you literally even just go back to the watchmaker analogy, right? If you look at a watch, you can see that it's made in this particular way, and a way that would require technical skill, like a way what you might say is, if you said, okay, well, what created this watch? You might conclude that the thing that created that watch would have to be something that could not have been physically put together itself. Like, maybe it emerged in some kind of other way, but it could not have been something that actually was put together mechanistically. And you would be right. Human beings are not put together mechanistically. We develop through this organic process of slowly growing up, pretty much. So, where did the watch come from? Well, the watch came from bits of metal that were smelted or whatever. I don't really quite know how. I imagine it was smelting. To very finely precise bits of metal, cogs, levers, all that kind of stuff. And all those bits of metal were put together and assembled. I realize I'm kind of doing almost like a weird thing with the watchmaker analogy, because typically the point of watchmaker analogy is you're supposed to argue something similar happened with humans, but that's not what I'm doing here. The point I would make is that's how a watch is put together. You get all of these individual pieces that are all separate, and you combine them together, and you produce, in that act of combining them all together, the watch. Is that how human beings are produced? Is that how human beings are made? Is that how human beings come into existence? No. Somebody didn't just sit down and they made my femur and my heart and my brain and my eyes, and then they just stuck them all together. No. I slowly developed all of that stuff in my mother's womb. I grew up and I developed other things. It's not really anything like how a watch came into existence. And if I then make a watch, you would be absolutely right to say that the process by which the watch came into existence is not the process by which the watchmaker came into existence. And you might look at a watch and say, well, what put together the watch? And if you posit that it is something that was not itself put together, then it would be you would actually be right. And it would be completely unreasonable for someone to say, well, you're saying that something that didn't have to be put together the watch, but what put together the thing that put together the watch? The whole point is that's not actually how it works. And just in general in life, we have this understanding that different things are made in different ways, and certain things by the nature of how they must have been put together by something else in a different way from how, that came into existence in a different way from how they themselves were constructed. And it's, on a macroscopic level, on a cosmological scale, you apply that to the entire universe. And you say, well, whatever the thing was that came before the universe must have come into existence in a different way from the universe itself, precisely because otherwise you would get this infinite regress. But the obvious solution there is to pick something that doesn't need an infinite regress, right? Like what puts together if you make a watch from a 3D printing machine and you get the watch components from one of those machines, well, okay, obviously the 3D printing machine had to have been assembled, but the point is we know that it can't be assembly all the way down. There must have been something before that, and what we find is actually it's human beings with their brains that weren't assembled, we developed them. I like the analogy of how links connecting to a chandelier eventually need a ceiling to connect to. It just doesn't go on forever. Yes. What makes the watch a watch is the intention. Well, yeah, that's another good point, right? And obviously with human beings, we wouldn't really say that as much. So yeah, it's just to show this idea that things and their creators do not have to have been produced the same way. And just as it's unreasonable to ask what produced all of the individual components of me and physically assembled me together would be an incoherent question, it's also incoherent to ask what was it that caused God.
It takes up sort of many forms. Richard Dawkins, in The God Delusion, had a chapter called Why God Almost Certainly Doesn't Exist. Rare for new atheists, I think, is to really make a proactive philosophical case against God's existence. And Dawkins said, well, look, if the universe is really complex and therefore requires some kind of complex designer, because that stuff just doesn't come up out of nowhere, what you're not considering is that the designer themselves would have to be more complex than the complex thing that they created. It's not like a...
Yeah, again, for me, I don't think this has to do with complexity at all. I think even if the natural world was very simple, we would still have to say, as long as it is... it's not about simplicity, it's about causality. The point is that the natural world is causal. The point is that everything that happens in the natural world happens because of something before it that caused it to happen. Whereas... if we imagine something outside of space and time, to me it wouldn't make sense to say that thing only does things because something separate from it causes it to happen. Rather, I would say, well, it's outside of space and time, it's above the natural world. I would assume it just kind of causes itself to do things. It's kind of self-sustaining, and all that makes sense to me. And that's got nothing to do with complexity. Of course, it's also the case of, you're kind of comparing apples with oranges when you talk about that complexity, because the complexity of the natural world would be very different from the complexity of an immaterial conscious mind. Yeah, maybe in some sense they're both complex, but like with reference to completely different things. The universe is complex because of all these mechanical processes and forces, and obviously just the breadth and age of it and all that kind of stuff. And the chemical and physical scientific processes and all the natural science of it. Whereas, like I say, we all understand none of that applies. God is complex maybe because of philosophical, metaphysical considerations. And yeah, okay, you could say they're both complex, but they're complex in kind of different senses. Such I say, yeah, it's an apple to oranges comparison.
It's not like a simple...
Oh, by the way,
hello,
Starfish
can build a MacBook Pro, but a MacBook Pro could build a chess computer. The complexity of the creator has to be bigger than the thing created. So even if we accept all of these arguments for God's existence, contingency, first cause, there must be a designer. Who designed?
I don't even know if it's necessarily true that something has to be more complicated than what it designs. I'm not sure. Again, I think the issue you run into is how are we defining complexity? Because complexity is not like a clear, fully objective thing.
The designer, Joe.
Wow. You know what? That I've just basically convinced me of atheism. I mean, I literally just, as you were talking, I was ordering my fedora. But anyway, yeah. So who designed the designer? That's a very, very good question. I mean, I do want to say and who created God? I don't want to belittle people who raise these questions. These are good questions. What is the relevant difference between God and non-God things, which explains why non-God things require an explanation, but God doesn't?
Yeah.
That's a very good and deep philosophical question. So I don't want to like.
And
it
feels like special pleading, right? Like we're kind of being funny here, and you're right. Like I've spent like.
I feel like it's one of those things. It feels like special pleading just because it is by necessity, right? Like the point is, I think the mistake people are making is thinking that it's special pleading to arrive at the answer, because it's almost like you could say like evolution is special pleading, right? Because you say like, oh, I looked at the fossil records, and I looked at the layers of the rocks, and I looked at the genetic code, and I looked at all this stuff, and then I came up with evolution, which is something that explains all of these things. I say, oh, how convenient that, oh, you find something new and then you like tweak your theory of evolution to make it fit with that new thing. But like kind of that's how science works, right? I mean, just to pick maybe something that's a little less controversial, quantum mechanics, right? The way quantum mechanics works is that they kind of just like they find out new information and then they're kind of like, all right, okay, wait, maybe we tweak that, blah blah blah. Maybe there's something called dark matter and all this sort of stuff. Like they come up with these ideas, or like the Higgs boson particle. These things that are kind of like, oh, these are the explanations we have for these complicated ideas. And it sound like if you look at it a certain way, you could just say, oh, these are like explanations they're coming up with ad hoc to explain all of these things that are happening. Oh, isn't that like special pleading? But the point is, it's not special pleading. They are concluding all of this stuff based on the fact their intention is to explain what we observe. So obviously, if their intention is to explain what we observe, they are going to come up with an explanation that perfectly accounts for everything we observe. So, and in the exact same sense with the whole cosmological argument, the intention is to explain how can we have a evidently causal universe without there being some kind of infinite regress where there must have just been an infinite number of past events where everything was constantly being caused by something else, because that doesn't really seem to make much sense. And the conclusion there is, well, it has to be some kind of thing that has the power to cause the universe, but itself did not need to be caused. That's not special pleading. That's looking at the issue at hand and coming up with the only explanation that actually makes sense.
10 years with these discussions, and I actually use that as a bit of a joke. Like anytime anyone makes any argument related to religion, I'm like, but who created God? Because it's such a sort of common thing to hear, which sort of throws theists into a frenzy because they're like, that's not how it works. But it does feel like special pleading. It does feel like someone saying, well, you, Mr. Atheist, you need explanations for contingent objects and you need design, but God, oh no, God doesn't need that. God doesn't need a designer. God doesn't need a beginning. God doesn't need a cause. And it does sort of feel like you're just carving out this space for a thing and having a different standard for your idea than for anybody else's. So like you said, for the theist to use God as an explanation for things like causation and design, but say that God himself is immune from causation and design, you have to show that, like, in principle, there is some kind of difference which allows us to do that with God, but not with, like, the universe or something.
Yeah, which isn't very difficult, because obviously God is outside of space and time. It makes sense.
And do you think there is such a difference?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not like I can pinpoint any particular difference and say that I'm basically like absolutely certain that this particular difference explains why God would be immune from these calls for explanation. But I think that there are just like a sufficiently large range of like reasonably plausible candidates that the theist really shouldn't be worried about this sort of question. So that's my like broad take on this.
All right, I think we can skip next one. I think that was very interesting. And again, I'll say it. I'll probably just say it every single time. I'm not skipping because I think this is boring. I'm skipping because we want to actually have some progress. And to be honest, I think once I've said my main take, as far as this being my channel, we've really got the most out of this. And again, the problem is I think this risks being a bit of a circle jerk where I will just agree with so much of what they say. So let's see what the next thing is.
Given that there are so many different, ideas of what God is like, some people think God is simple. Some people think God is complex. Some people think that God sent his son to die on a cross. Some people think that God's final messenger was a man called Muhammad. Some people believe that God has many manifestations in different sort of, pantheistic deities. The atheist, surely, just looks at all of these gods and says to the Christian, you don't believe in the Muslim God, you don't believe in Thor, you don't believe in any of these other gods. All I do is go one God further.
I feel like he's literally like, they're both laughing because it is such a stupid argument. It's such an awful, terrible argument because obviously there's a massive difference between believing in no God at all and believing in one God. Yeah, it's just it's crazy, right? Because you just imagine so many situations, right, where technically speaking, if you believe anyone did anything, then someone who says like, oh, I don't believe anyone did that. So like, I don't know, like who is it who fired the bullet at who did it? Who is it who fired the bullet that killed JFK? And someone might say Lee Harvey Oswald. Someone else might say, I don't know, Mossad or whatever. And then someone else says, oh, I don't think anyone did it. I don't think anyone fired the bullet. I think the gun was just like, I think the gun just got up and fired of its own accord or whatever. And so I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like you think nobody fired the gun? You think what? And then say, well, there are, I don't know how many people there were in well, okay, let's put it this way. Okay, I believe I'm right. There have been estimated to be 110 billion human beings who have ever lived. That's like an estimate. 110 billion human beings have ever lived. You think 109.999999999 billion people didn't fire a bullet at Kennedy? I just believe one more person than you also didn't fire the bullet at Kennedy. You can see how that's really stupid, right? Because, again, it doesn't matter how many you don't believe in. The point is that you actually believe in something that makes sense in terms of explaining the available information, whereas the other person... yeah, that's exactly a good point. Yeah, I don't believe 2 + 2 = 4. You don't believe in other answers. I just take it one step further. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good. That is actually I actually really love that one. I think Ulix, honestly, you came in, I think, really strong. I mean, stars. You're all doing a good job. I think it's actually such an easy thing to make fun of. Starfist Shen saying, I just believe in one less suspect. Exactly. But yeah, I think so. The numbers one is interesting, right? Because there's an infinite number of numbers other than 4. So the maths pleb, or whatever, the maths chud, maths cuck, thinks that 2 + 2 = 4. But they don't think 2 + 2 = 3, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10, or 753 quadrillion. There are infinite numbers that they do not think result from 2 + 2 = 4. Oh, sorry, 2 + 2. And yeah, of course, by denying that 2 + 2 = 4, you are simply denying one more number than them. So yeah, I think you've kind of done a really good job there. I just want to say, Richard says, this isn't as fun when they aren't brash morons screaming Sky Daddy lol. Yeah, you're kind of right. And that's sort of another reason why I'm skipping through this. Like, Alex O'Connor is very interesting to listen to. But I think, let me rephrase that. I think Alex O'Connor would be a very interesting person to talk to because he's so reasonable. That's really the goal here. I think I'll have made it on this channel if somehow I get to a point where I speak to Alex O'Connor. Although it's interesting to me the number of people Alex O'Connor hasn't spoken to. Like, it's very weird to me that as far as I know, Alex O'Connor has never spoken to Redeem Zuma. Even though, like, Redeem Zuma, like, he makes moves. I've never really understood why. But then I guess, like, Alex O'Connor has spoken to people like Trent Horn. So, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the rules are for what you have to do for Alex O'Connor to consider you worth speaking to. But yeah, if I ever speak to Alex O'Connor, I'd love that. Because he's such a reasonable person, I think you can have a very productive discussion with him. But yeah, the problem is he's so reasonable that it's not necessarily entertaining for a response format, and that's why I've kind of been skipping through it. Anyway, yeah, so I think we pretty much... I think everyone just immediately recognizes why this I just believe in one fewer thing than you is just such nonsense. There was something else I was thinking. I'm trying to think I know what it was. Yeah, so one time I encountered, because this is the other way people say, well, if you consider why it is that you reject all the other gods, you'll realize why it is that I reject yours. And I was like, well, ultimately the main reason why I reject all the other gods is because I believe the Christian God makes far more sense as a sort of account of theology. Like, I think the Christian God makes far more sense from a theological perspective when you're looking at all the kind of metaphysics and what you'd have to believe in order for the Christian God to be true. I just think all of that makes the most sense. And they were like, okay, well, I believe, that's exactly why I reject your God. Because obviously they'd already committed to the bit, right? Like, they already said at the start, whatever your reason is for rejecting all the other gods is the reason I reject yours. But it's almost like they're on autopilot. So even though the answer I gave of, well, I reject all the other gods because I think the Christian God makes the most sense, obviously completely ruined the rhetorical thing they were trying to do. They just like powered through anyway. They were like, and I was like, oh, so you reject the Christian God because you think that your God makes more sense, the God you believe in makes more sense. And they were like, yes. It was very funny. But yeah, like that's kind of the thing, right? In reality, it's very common for people to. I almost feel like it's kind of a fractal in a way. Is that like the expression I'm looking for? Where usually people will have something they believe, and then there'll be competing options in terms of what they can believe from there. So they'll believe something else, and then there'll be competing options from there, and and that's just like the way that people kind of come to conclusions. You say, well, first of all, I think this, and then specifically with regards to this question, okay, I think this, and I think this, and I think this. And yeah, obviously, there's going to be so many different reasons why they've rejected the alternative positions at every single step of that coming to the conclusion they've reached, that to say, oh, you just, basically whatever reason it is you've arrived at, whatever myriad choices you had to make in terms of analyzing which side you were going to land on, all these different things that cause you to arrive at the position you have. Yeah, I basically just reject all of yours for the exact same reason. And of course, this also extends from the nonsense claim of like, all religions are basically the same. Which, of course, is ridiculous. Because, again, like, even if I was to talk about a specific religion like Islam, the reasons why I reject Islam are often specific. I don't want to say specifically because this makes it sound a little bit like them. But they're often in direct contrast to the fact that I find that stuff so compelling in Christianity. So one of the main reasons I reject Islam is because it doesn't offer any additional theological substance to what it's supposed to be a progressive revelation of. In contrast to Christianity, which I think adds a huge amount of theological substance to the Old Testament. So yeah. Okay, this is an interesting point from Kleptomanta. I think it works as an explanation of what it's like to be an atheist, not an argument for it. Okay, I kind of get what you're saying there. So basically, I think kind of the point would be that there might be some people who are like, well, I just don't understand what it's like to not believe in God. And you say, well, you understand what it's like to not believe in some other gods. Yeah, and that's true. I think the difference there, obviously, is that even that person might be thinking, well, I can understand being a Muslim because at least if you're a Muslim, you believe in some God. So I don't know if it necessarily always works, but I kind of get what you're saying. That obviously, if someone's specifically saying, I don't understand how someone could not believe in the Christian God specifically, well, yeah, to just say, well, imagine all the gods that you don't believe in. But yeah, if someone's saying, I don't understand how you can, like, if someone's saying, well, I understand how someone could be a Muslim, I understand how someone could be a Hindu, I understand how someone could be a Jew, I understand how someone could be a Mormon, but I don't understand how someone could be an atheist. I think in that context, it's pretty obvious the thing they're confused about is just the idea of, well, it doesn't matter what God you believe in, but I can, if you don't believe in any God at all, that doesn't make any sense to me. In that context, I guess that person's probably just never going to be able to understand atheism.
You already know what it's like to be an atheist in respect to 2,999 gods. I just go one more. So there. What do you think of that?
Brilliant. I mean, yeah.
That's unexplained, by the way. This is it's the Ricky Gervais bit,
Yeah. Well, yeah, the one less God thing. This is. So again, I want to emphasize that there's something good and valuable about.
I want to emphasize it's one fewer gods.
About the slogan. I don't want us to lose that, right? It's an appeal to consistency, maybe, or like a non-arbitrariness. Like you shouldn't be carving out arbitrary exceptions for your own views.
Well, yeah, that is also another good point. Like, I come into this as someone, and I've said this before, it's an opinion that I stand by. I am more confident that if God exists, Christianity is true, than I am that God exists. There is not an iota of my mind concerned with the possibility that Islam or Judaism or any variety of paganism is true. Because I actually think all of those worldviews have massive, obvious issues, which I don't think are present for Christianity at all. And obviously I've spoken before about how I think that the Bible has miraculous theological coherence, and that's the main reason why I am a Christian. So for me, even my main reason for being an atheist, my main reason for being a theist is specifically because I find Christianity so convincing. And there are a few other people like that who have that opinion of it's not that they saw convincing reasons for God and then decided Christianity made the most sense, but rather they investigated religion as an atheist, saw how much sense Christianity specifically made, and based on that, they then accepted the existence of God because of how convincing they found Christianity specifically. So obviously that's kind of the perspective I'm coming at this from. I can understand that if there is someone who they just believe in a God and they seem to pick Christianity arbitrarily, it would be worth getting that person to consider, well, why is it that you specifically believe in Christianity as opposed to all the other religious viewpoints you could believe in?
And it's just in general an injunction against special pleading, right? And that's good. That's a good kind of injunction. But in terms of like an argument for atheism or scoring dialectical points, at least against sophisticated theists, I think it'll fall flat.
Yeah.
I mean, it may work if all gods had an equal likelihood of existence, so that if some gods, like, very likely don't exist, like Zeus or the flying spaghetti monster or the Disney princess god, then, neither would the monotheistic god of traditional Abrahamic religions, because all gods are equally likely, and so those gods are super duper unlikely, so is the traditional god of Abrahamic religion. But of course, the traditional theist is going to say that not all gods are equally likely.
Yeah.
Right, we have good grounds, at least according to the traditional theist, to say that there's a single, perfect, necessarily existing, unlimited being at the foundation of reality. Seems to be much more kind of intrinsically plausible than these other candidates, for the various reasons that we've been going over. It's not like arbitrarily limited. We have reasons to think that there's some kind of necessary foundation to reality. It's a relatively elegant hypothesis that could be quite compactly described in terms of these very uniform properties like omnipotence, all power, all knowledge, all goodness, and whatnot. It's not carving out any arbitrary exceptions. And moreover, they'll say that in addition to being quite intrinsically plausible, and much more plausible than these other candidates like Zeus or Thor or the flying spaghetti monster, we do indeed have lots of evidence for the existence of such a traditional monotheistic god from,
I'm waiting for Alex to say something.
And various other features of reality. And maybe even they'll sprinkle in some miracles for their favored theistic tradition. But that's, an optional add-on for the connoisseurs.
Yes. Well, I want to say one thing in defense of this claim, which is that I think it often comes up in the context where people are like, I don't know, somebody kind of says, like, how could you be an atheist? Like psychological.
Okay, to be fair, so this is something you already mentioned, Kleptomanta, and I think we kind of already responded to this, yeah, which is that it kind of makes sense, but it sort of doesn't. Again, so for the record, I think the inability of someone to understand how someone could be an atheist is a problem, and this is something I've actually spoken about before. But yeah, exactly, yeah, still your point. Or did you watch this video before? Did you pre-watch? Anyway. But yeah, obviously, kind of like I said, I don't know that this necessarily would help that person, because the thing that person is struggling with is how could you not believe in some god? And obviously, in that context, it might be the case that they're just never going to be able to understand it. So, yeah. It only really works if someone's thing is like, how can you not believe in my god specifically? But I think since Alex is going to say the same thing, yeah, basically my strategy I'm now doing is we watch them make the argument, I respond, and then we listen, and then we see kind of like the second thing Alex says, and if then we move on.
Let's get a bit more cultural.
Oh, I love this.
Here's a claim. I can't remember who was the originator. It might have been someone like Richard Dawkins. Science flies you to the moon. Religion flies you into buildings.
That's so funny. I totally forgot about that. That's honestly, that's such a funny line. Religion flies you into buildings. So that's not really okay. So let's take that seriously as an argument. It is like that's like a funny line. Like I will say this, I can respect that as a funny line. I mean, in a way, like, and I don't know if they're going to get into the whole, like, you know, like that like famous chart of like how religion caused everyone to lose all of their knowledge due to the Dark Ages. It's so funny just like being paused on that. That's what he cooked with that one. Not gonna lie, yeah, exactly. I mean, you kind of got like a few things here. One that I don't like is this tendency to just say religion when you're describing one very specific religion. Look, I'm not saying like Islam is the worst religion imaginable in the entire world, whatever, but it does annoy me. This is something you see all the time on Reddit. Like on World News or the UK subreddit, whenever there's a story like Muslim gangs stone woman alive for trying to read, and like all the comments just like, oh, religion is such a cancer, religion is so destructive, religion is just a pollution of society, but like just so much attacking religion. It's like, you maybe think you should have some recognition that you're talking, like, it wasn't, and again, like, whatever, I'm a Christian, but it wasn't the Buddhists who did this. It wasn't the Jains who did this, was it Jains? It wasn't even like the Norse neo-pagans who did this. It does annoy me and of course you have it here, right? Because there's only one religion that motivated people to fly into buildings. So that's kind of annoying. Having said that, to walk that back, there is also the other aspect of, you know, there is a geopolitical reality to why those people flew into buildings. And obviously you can point out that that various anarchist, separatist groups, like you have the Basque separatists in Spain, you know, lots of different groups that have fought for their independence. I think even like the Kurds, I think the Kurds have done some resistance now. And Kurds are predominantly Muslim, fighting against Muslims. So there is that aspect of it's not always about religion. It can be about geopolitical factors motivating their actions, and religion is kind of just the excuse. That's the other thing. But of course, yeah, the broader thing here is like that whole science flies you to the moon. This idea that like atheism is really scientific, religion is not scientific. Obviously, there is this argument that the presuppositions of theism are actually more conducive to science. That in order to do science, you have to believe that the universe is knowable, that we should know it, and that we should want to know it. And atheism doesn't offer any real foundations for those beliefs, whereas classical theism does. And then, you just have the fact that actually this whole idea of the Dark Ages is complete nonsense. There were incredible advancements in natural science in the Middle Ages in terms of metalworking, in terms of architecture. If you showed, and of course, like this is the other thing, like this is weird, like simping for pagans, where often these people that like the Greeks and the Romans were so scientifically advanced, they really weren't at all. But yeah, if you showed a Greek or a Roman a medieval European cathedral, they would lose their mind. If you put a Roman up against a piece of so-called Dark Age, which is to say, I guess like late Iron Age, like a sword, like a European sword made with proper like advanced techniques, they would absolutely be rinsed. The reality is that Christianity coincided with plenty of continued advancement, and yeah, it's a bit whatever. It's the whole thing's ridiculous. And of course, then you even there's so much about this is nonsense. Yeah. But it is funny at least. But yeah, obviously you also have the fact that it's like science versus religion doesn't really make sense as a distinction.
Discuss.
Yeah, this is man, I should have had the neck beard with this one. This is a good one. I don't know. So it's like, yeah, science also creates the atomic bomb, right?
That's another good point, yeah.
And also flying you into buildings.
There's so many angles from which you can attack this.
I don't know, that seems to just be like a perversion of religion. I don't really have much to say about this. Like, well, what is this supposed to be like a rhetorical point? Like, science is better than religion? I guess it just depends on how you like use science. Science is a collection of tools to investigate.
Oh, I mean, that's the other thing, right? To be fair, they could only fly into a building because of science, right? Like the same science that produced the ability to fly to the moon is also the same science that produced the ability for what do they say, like heavier than air flight in general, right? Like jet fuel and its notorious capacity to melt steel beams came from science. So actually, yeah, science Science also flies you into buildings.
Natural world. Religion is maybe a collection of spiritual tools to investigate the spiritual world or something like that. You can misuse the tools in either case. You can misuse the tools of science by creating an atomic bomb and then politically weaponizing it and then dropping it on tons of innocent civilians and whatnot. And you can also misuse the tools of religion. You can try to interpret verses that aren't supposed to be interpreted a certain way to, dehumanize others, to justify racism, sexism, violence, terrorism, and whatnot. But
I will say, like, this whole like misusing religion, I think that can be like taken too far. Like, there is like this thing of like people just act like every thing that they don't like in their religion is being misused. And like everyone celebrates it. I remember this time when there was like a terrorist in the UK. It was like one of those stabby ones rather than one of those explodey ones. And I think they'd been apprehended. And you heard this guy in the background like, "Oh, you ain't a Muslim, mate. You ain't a Muslim. You ain't even a Muslim. What you doing?" And like everyone was like cheering, like, "Yeah, this hero told this guy like he's not a true Muslim." But it's like, well, what's your like evidence for that? Like, why are we accepting that this random guy behind the camera being like, "Oh, you ain't a Muslim"? Why are we accepting he's like the authority on what actually makes someone a Muslim? And why is it all of these kind of, tabloids and political like online commentators saying, "Yeah, I'm so like I'm glad we saw this guy explain that this guy isn't a Muslim." Like, why are they so willing to accept that? The reality is that there is stuff in like this whole thing of like, "Oh, you're just misusing religion," I think is kind of nonsense, because sometimes religion just does teach things, right? I wouldn't say that, obviously we recently spoke about slavery. I've said I think the Bible endorses slavery in certain contexts, and I wouldn't say that, "Oh, they were misusing religion." Like, that's the problem. And I think that's kind of, it's always a danger road, because when you start talking about like people misusing religion, what you're really saying is they are using the religion in a way that I don't like. And what you're, by extension, really saying is that the entirety of how religion is to be interpreted is up to subjective personal opinion, right? Like, "Oh, this person thinks that gay marriage is wrong, but they're not religious, they're just misusing religion. This person thinks they can use violent terrorism, but they're not actually religious, they're just misusing religion." Okay, so what you're basically saying is religion is just about, it's not about like any intrinsic true statements or anything that actually is concrete. It's just about how do you want it to be used, and you think those who are using it in a way you don't like are misusing it. I don't really agree with that kind of way of thinking.
Sophisticated adherents of the relevant religions will just tell you that these are perversions of the relevant religions. And for the religions for which it's not the case that these are perversions, then I would just say so much the worse for those particular religions.
That's also good. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay, well done. Yeah, good point. Like, there are some religions that are just bad.
I think, again, the more sophisticated versions of the religions don't have these, like, nasty consequences, but that's just my brief take.
I think the issue is, right, so obviously this is a sort of religion is bad thing, and there's this conflict thesis between science and religion, that they're somehow in conflict with each other. And I think that is often the case. There are particular religious claims or doctrinal affairs which run in the face of scientific understandings that we have of the world. But it kind of led to this, I think at the height of New Atheism, it had this, like, we're on team science, you're on team religion. And the point is, like, science is great. Science does all this cool stuff for us and it takes us to the moon, but religion is evil. And the difference is, like, yeah, people want to point out, but yeah, like, science also gives you the atomic bomb, sure, but the scientific method doesn't, like, tell you to drop it on people, right? Science is like a key that opens the door to heaven and hell, as I think Richard Feynman had talked about in his, he like learned it from a Buddhist or something, I'm not sure. It's a tool, and you can use it to sort of do whatever you want. The thing that you need, because reason is the slave of the passions, of course, you need some kind of motivating principle on how to use it. And the point is that for a religious believer who, flies into a building, like, they had to quite strongly believe that there was going to be an afterlife, that there was an overarching reason to be doing this, otherwise they...
Oh yeah, so none of that's actually true, by the way. So that's the issue, and it goes back to the other thing I just said, which is that it really wasn't about religion. For those who don't know, my favourite book of all time, that's not true. It's actually a very violent and hateful book. But The Turner Diaries, which is about white nationalism, ends with someone, I think they fly a plane laden with explosives into the White House, and that's basically the important step in being able to lead to a neo-Nazi takeover of the United States. And in the context of the book, this is presented as a very heroic action. There's no indication that that person believes in any sort of afterlife, but rather they believe what they're doing is for a righteous cause. With that said, there are many terrorists who, and indeed freedom fighters, as they're sometimes called by their fans, who do these actions. A lot of them, I think, are maybe likely to be religious, maybe nominally religious, but at the same time, I think enough of them aren't that we can conclude that actually, in the case of the ones who are, if they weren't religious, they'd do it anyway. Like, I actually don't really think that most of the Muslims who, because you look at something like the 7/7 bombings, I'm not going to say it was fine, I'm not going to say it was alpha, I'm not going to say it was actually a glorious fight back against Western imperialism, but the reality is that we, the United Kingdom, illegally invaded Iraq. That was bad. We illegally invaded Iraq. And the people who said, you know what, the fact that the United Kingdom is this really powerful country, and there's no way that Iraq could possibly win a conventional war against them, but they did this thing, and it was a really bad thing they did. The only way I can push back against this is to just hit them where it hurt, just like they hit Iraq. And the only way I can do it is like an asymmetrical war. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to get onto a bomb. I'm going to blow myself. Sorry, I'm going to get onto a bus. I'm going to blow myself up. I don't actually think that person needed any religious conviction whatsoever to have done that thing. I think entirely just thinking of it in terms of, you know what, there's people dying in Iraq all the time. This is a war that's happening. This is a war that the United Kingdom is fighting against the Arab world. As an Arab, as someone who hates to see what the UK is doing, I'm going to fight back. And, I'm going to lose my life. But you know what? That's what happens in a war, right? People do lose their lives. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the kamikaze people did it. I don't know, like there is like an idea of religion in Japan. But again, I just don't think that there has to be this religious thing to motivate this self-sacrificial thing people do. I actually think all of these people would do all this stuff, or at least the vast majority of them would do all this stuff anyway, just motivated by their political convictions, because always these are about political convictions, usually about some idea of their nation. Obviously 9/11 was in response to all sorts of encroachments that the United States was doing into Arab land, you could say Islamic land, but again, I think that didn't necessarily have a religious significance to it. I think it had a more national significance to it. And yeah, that's I think basically where it's at. I'm not obviously, like, once the religion goes into the mix, the religion is going to become a big part of it. But I honestly think that very little would be different in terms of terrorism and all that kind of stuff if religion never existed.
Wouldn't have done. That's not something science can get people to do. You need this belief in the ultimate correctness and the divine authority of your behaviors.
Yeah, see, I just disagree.
To commit such incredible acts. And that's something that if you're just a scientist who
and by the way, for the record, even if we were accepting that, that's not like, okay, sure, this can lead to people being so convinced that they're right that they do evil things, but I also think it can be the case that this can convince people so much that they're right that they do good things. I mean, I was against the Iraq War. I'm still against the Iraq War, and the same, in some sense, it's the same moral conviction that had people so against the Iraq War that they're willing to do a terrorism that has me so against it. I'm willing to have said, to have taken a stand against it, and that's a good thing, right? Like, in a way, the person who is like, Iraq war, schmiraq, schmore. I don't really care. Okay, so we killed some civilians. Okay, so we destabilized an entire region. Alright, so we, went over, invaded the country. Loads of our own soldiers died. Loads of people on the other side died. It was all for nothing. Tony Blair was lying. There weren't any WMDs, but I don't care. Is that person better? Not really. So that's the thing, ultimately, if Alex O'Connor's criticism here, and I know that he's just playing devil's advocate, but if his criticism is, well, this religion gives people a really strong sense of moral conviction, and that can motivate them to do bad things. Honestly, I kind of would rather a world where everyone has a strong sense of moral conviction, even if that means some of them do a terrorism, than a world where the majority opinion is just, I don't really care, morality schmorality.
Believe in a religion, you're not going to be beholden to that.
I know you're doing your hardest, you're doing your darndest, but you said...
Kleptomania says, like, people just use, the logic I presented there to simp for Islam. Yeah, it's an interest. See, I do get where you're coming from, because on the one, I'm like in a weird situation where I do think that Islam clearly teaches and like advocates for fighting the unbelievers, using violence, all that kind of stuff. There's literally a quote from Muhammad in one of the hadith. He says, "Through terror I have been made victorious." There is that idea, and yet at the same time, I must admit, and maybe it's because my formal university degree was in international relations, I struggle to not entirely understand all of the like geopolitically significant stuff. I think the big exception to all of this would be ISIS, to be fair. Like, ISIS was just crazy. So I do think there is like an aspect which is like entirely about Muslim. When did Jesus justify slavery? I don't know that you can say Jesus justified slavery. I think you'd have to say that I mean, Jesus doesn't really mention slavery. I'm trying to think. I don't think he does. Paul mentions slavery, and obviously Moses mentioned slavery. I don't think Jesus does, so I'm not sure quite what you're referring to there.
It's some false claims there, so I gotta step in and save the day,
what?
I suppose. Yeah. Well, you don't need religion to get people to do these heinous things, right? And you don't need to have some.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I think we'll skip because we do want to make progress. I would love to get to an hour and a half. So let's see.
That people throw out as well, which is that, again, we're atheists here, right? And we're speaking to the religious person, and we say, okay, so you're like a Christian or you're a Muslim or something, but if you'd have been born somewhere else in the world, you'd have a different religious belief. Like, yeah, you're a Christian because you grew up in, like, Kentucky, right? But if you'd have been born in Iran, chances are you probably would have been a Muslim. And given, like, if God exists, then given that he probably wants to come to know everybody, why would he allow people's likelihood of being saved to be dictated by where they happen to grow up?
Yeah, okay, so this is something that I've responded to before a lot. So this is a very popular argument. And to me, there's always different aspects of how I look at this. One of them is to kind of point out that if this is kind of your argument, then... So there's kind of see the whole thing of you only believe what you believe because you come from this place, as if it's not a good reason to believe that. I don't think that's very good. Having said that, this guy, Alex, is kind of pivoted to saying well, why would God arrange it this way? Which is really only an argument against Christianity and Islam and other religions that are all very much about people needing to believe this thing. But ultimately, again, it's kind of not really relevant, because actually we're now at a point where really anyone can realize Christianity is true. And while, Muslims in Muslim countries are less likely to realize that, they don't really have an excuse. It doesn't take very much study to realize Islam is false. So, yeah, I mean, if this was just presented as well, you're only Christian... I mean, pretty much my whole argument against this has just been that, Christianity at this point has spread to so many places. Actually, this idea of you just you wouldn't believe this if you were born in India. There are people at my church who were born in India. You wouldn't believe this if you were born in China. There are people at my church who were born in China. You wouldn't believe this if you were born in Azerbaijan. There's a guy at my church. Guess where he was born? His name's Farhad. He's a really friendly guy, and yeah, he's from Azerbaijan. Yeah, here I am on the other side of the globe 2,000 years later being a Christian, lol. Yeah, I think that's... yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Right, so I think we'll just watch them kind of say... Because to me, I just don't think this argument's very interesting at all. It's kind of my stance. So I'd be interested to hear where they go with this. And significantly, they speak about this for... What? So they start speaking at 1 hour and 3 minutes. They speak about this for almost half an hour, so...
So, if you were born somewhere else...
So I don't know if I can justify skipping over all this. Let's see.
You'd have a different religion. Therefore, that gives me reason to distrust the truth of the religion to which you belong. Thoughts?
Okay, so interestingly, he's now gone back to that that argument, and yeah, I think it's see. Someone said to me, it was kind of interesting. They said, "Oh, you know, you do all of this work to justify how you arrived at the position you've arrived at, and yet, and basically to say that it's not just that you were born in a place, and yet you have arrived at possibly the most quintessentially English position." Of sort of evangelical, Baptist, vaguely puritanical, kind of KJVO, like a lot of stuff that's like very obviously not kind of contemporary English, because contemporary England isn't very religious at all, but like kind of 16th, 17th century style English Protestantism, which would later kind of migrate over to America. That's the position you've arrived at. You just sound like a combination of an old school return LARPer who is British, and that's how you've arrived at this position. And, you know, they kind of said that, and I thought that is like an interesting thing, you know, because obviously it's never mind the fact that I, in investigating religion, didn't conclude that Hinduism or Islam or Judaism is true. I didn't even conclude that Catholicism is true. I didn't even conclude that Lutheranism is true. I didn't even conclude that Presbyterianism is true. You know, like I could have, Scotland's close by, I could have said Presbyterianism is true and been like, hey, you know, even though I'm English, I think the Scottish have it right on this one because Scotland is historically Presbyterian. Or United Reform with the Dutch. No, I specifically have landed on this position that, who knows, for all I know, there have been, well, I was going to say the first person, obviously the first person was actually Jesus Christ Paul, that kind of stuff. But so I don't know how to express this, but basically to kind of say, for all I know, more people, I say this again, for all I know, more people have expressed the correct theology of evangelical, Baptist, kind of puritanical, all that kind of stuff, within a mile of where I am sitting right now than anywhere else in the world. That is a possibility. It's not guaranteed. There's no necessary likelihood to it. I do live in quite an old city, but it's possible because obviously you can't know anyone's heart. You might think, well, you know, it's probably been, you know, like Southern Bible Belt, that would be where, but you know, England's been around a lot longer. So yeah, maybe it is the case that there are more people who have expressed my point of view on this issue within a mile of where I am right now than anywhere else on earth. And maybe that's a bit crazy, because you couldn't say that if I was a Catholic, right? You couldn't say that if I was Presbyterian. You certainly couldn't say that if I was a Muslim. It would be say there are more people who have been Muslim within a mile of where I am right now than anywhere else on earth. Apostolic Apprentice, you're like so far behind, but I already addressed that actually, so that's really funny. Anyway, I do get it. Now there is like two things I would say to that. One, just in general, well, realistically, if there is a religion that's true, someone is going to have to be from that very area where it's true. Like, if it turned out Islam was true, the reality is some people would have to be, you know, some people would have to live in Mecca, right? So something like, oh, we're here right away. And what else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, sorry. The other thing is, I will say that maybe it's not a coincidence that I am someone on this channel who kind of has a platform, is speaking the lingua franca. Maybe it's not a coincidence that the UK is both where I'm from as someone talking about this issue, and also is the place where the correct religion has been most well established and most entrenched. Because maybe that's divine providence, right? Like, maybe it would actually make sense that the largest empire to have ever existed, that is, you know, still produced a lingua franca, that obviously kind of gave birth to what is right now, at least for now, the world's superpower. Maybe it actually makes sense that would be the area that has the correct religion. So that's kind of just the other thing I would say in that regard.
Yeah, so this one is one that I just think conduces to lots of really cool and fun philosophizing. So like, this is one that I've got like a soft spot for this one, because it's like, it really does get people thinking. and it's a really interesting point. And you kind of, I think we all sense that there's like something at the core here, which is like interesting and right in some kind of important way. Now, it is kind of hard though to find what exactly that is. Okay, so like it can't just be that had I been born elsewhere,
Is Romans 5:10 your favorite verse? Sort of. So the answer is it was at the time I made this channel my favorite verse, and based on that, it's unlikely to ever become like, it's always going to remain one of my favorite verses simply because I like it so much. But I don't know. I'm not sure. I will say this. I don't know what. There's not like an obvious thing that stands out as an alternative right now. And there was a verse I recently saw that I really liked, and I've already forgotten what it is. I think it's Psalm 34, verse 18. Let's confirm if I'm right. I think I actually mentioned this recently, though. So, like, that's just a verse that's been, like, I read it, and it just, like, really struck me. So, that might be, at least right now, my favorite Psalm verse, but let's find it. I hope I'm right. Let's see. 34, verse 18. Yes, I have remembered it, which is useful. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit. I don't know why, I just love that idea. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart. So that idea, like, God is near to you. He's always like, he's just right around the corner. If you're like brokenhearted, don't worry, because the Lord is coming. I think that's like such a beautiful notion. But yeah, the basic answer would be yes.
would not have believed that P is some kind of...
Yeah, but you say lingua franca in Latin. Yeah, it is always an irony there. I've always like thought like that it would be nice to see the European Union kind of like unite into just one big country, because I just think, why are they all like, they're all foreigners, just, hang out with each other. But I always think, I don't really know that I would like the UK to be part of it, and yet at the same time, I kind of feel like the lingua franca would have to be, even though, yeah, it's really frank, because lingua franca literally means like French language, right? Because France used to be the lingua franca, but it's just not anymore, and I feel like their lingua franca would actually have to be English. So we should just call it a lingua angla. To be fair, lingua angla does not sound anything like as good, so that's probably why.
Like defeater for P. So it kind of somehow like undermines my justification or grounds for accepting P. I mean, listen, had I been born elsewhere, I would not have believed that I was born in Indiana. I mean, like had I been born in Ohio, I would not have believed I was born in Indiana. That doesn't mean I should just like start questioning like whether I was born in Indiana or something.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that general principle can't be true. Okay, so maybe we have to modify the general principle. Is it something like, had you been born elsewhere and used the same like method for belief formation that you in fact used? So like deference to religious authority or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, well, the other stupid thing here, of course, is that we know that many, many people all over the globe, and someone already kind of referenced this with, Blake, I think, mentioned this. Someone was already convinced. Like, that's the thing, right? People say, oh, you're only a Christian because you're British, but actually, in that case, I should be an Anglo-Saxon pagan, except for the fact that a load of Anglo-Saxons, just like me, 1,000 years ago and a bit, were convinced that Christianity is true. So if they were convinced Christianity is true, why not me, right? Like, that's kind of my stance. Like, seeing as we know that religions actually can spread to people who don't believe that religion, weren't born to believe that religion, I think it's a little bit, and it's one of those things, right? I mentioned this before. I feel a little bit preemptively sorry for my children that they're going to have to deal with people saying, oh, you're only a Christian because you were raised from birth. Because obviously I get the advantage, and I say it, and I sometimes feel like maybe I shouldn't milk this, because, or like I shouldn't bring this up as a positive, because actually I'm just making it harder for the Christians of whom this isn't the case. I will say, oh, I was raised an atheist, and as someone who was raised an atheist, kind of the implication is, well, I addressed this more objectively, I came into this from an atheistic perspective, blah, blah, blah. But obviously I'm aware that my children aren't going to have that opportunity. They're going to have been raised in a Christian household. And obviously what I would say is, well, their defense should be, well, actually, my dad was an atheist. He was independently convinced this is true. So there's no reason to think I couldn't have been convinced it's true myself. It just so happens I was raised in a Christian family. But if I wasn't raised in a Christian family, guess what? Many people aren't raised in Christian families and still become Christian. Even if I hadn't been born in a Christian country, guess what? My ancestors, who were not born in a Christian country, still converted to Christianity.
Then you would have believed something different. Maybe that's like the modified principle, and maybe that's supposed to like undermine the belief or something like that.
Here's the issue, right? As far as I see it, is that in theory, this is a version of the genetic fallacy, right? So the genetic fallacy is a type of informal logical fallacy, which says that because the means by which you came to believe something were faulty, the thing you believe must be false. So I might want to say, oh, you only believe in Christianity because you were born in Kentucky, right? Like, okay, but somebody could say, yeah, but I only believe that the Earth is a globe because I was taught it in school. That's not a very conclusive reason. Like, that's a bad reason. And so does that mean it's false that the Earth is a globe because my reason for believing this true claim were a bit sort of faulty or weird? It's like, yeah, well, if you'd have been born 2,000 years ago, or you would have thought that the Earth was flat. I don't even think that's true, by the way. But suppose it were. That's not depends where, I suppose. But like, you could have been born at a certain point in human history where you would have thought the Earth is flat, right? And so if you'd have been born elsewhere, you would think the Earth is flat. Therefore, can we really say the Earth is a globe if you only believe that because of where you happen to have been born? So it seems fallacious to say that because you've got bad reasons to believe something, that thing must be false. However, I think that when you're talking about God's existence, this doesn't apply. I was going to write a piece on this called the genetic fallacy, right? Because people bring this up all the time. And it's like, yeah, okay, so for just things that just happen to be true about the universe, like where you happen to be born, or, whether the Earth is a globe or whatever, like you could be, it would be expected on theism or atheism or whatever, that there would be some people who just don't know those facts, Like if you were born in like some...
No nice way of saying this, but I realized I had a zit on my cheek, and I decided right now on camera would be a perfect time to... It's on this side, so I'm turned away from the camera. But like while I was talking, I don't know, you can go back and you'll like see me squeeze it. And I was like, I don't know now. Now I'm like bleeding down that side of my face.
Rural, like Asian town 3,000 years ago, you wouldn't know what the capital of France in 2025 is. Right. And that's just like, that's not a problem. Like, yeah, that's...
Hey, Radical Apologist, how are you doing, my buddy?
That's just true. However...
Oh, that's right, sorry, we're at the end. Oh, I didn't even like really register, okay. We're gonna have to, so we've not even made it halfway. Oh, whatever. At least we made it over an hour through. Yeah, we're gonna have to pick this up next time. Well, okay, oh, hello, I didn't really mean to do that. You know what, actually, let's just go a little bit over. Let's just see and make the argument, then we'll go.
If my philosophy was that there was a creator of the universe who intentionally created people so that they could enjoy the knowledge that Paris is the capital city of France in 2025, then given that he created a universe in which many people were born not knowing that, I would think that would be disconfirming evidence for the existence of God.
So there we go. That's basically his argument. Like, if God wants people to become Christian, why did he make it so that so many people don't know that? But yeah, the issue of this is just a very simplistic understanding of where God's coming from. First of all, I don't think it's necessarily true that God wants every single person to know all the specifics. The Bible, I think, quite clearly teaches that there is some mechanism. Oh, I screwed up my camera, but I don't think that I screwed up anything else. Let me just fix my camera. Hopefully everything else works. Okay. Right. Seems everything else works. Yeah, basically, the Bible seems to say there's some mechanism by which people can get saved without knowing all the details, right? Because, obviously it talks about how people in like Jesus basically says that, you know, like all the people in all these pagan towns, they would believe, they will actually stand over you in judgment. Jesus literally says to the Israelites, you know, the Queen of Sheba will stand over you in judgment, blah blah blah. There seems to be this understanding actually that there is some way, even based on their limited knowledge, that these people could get saved. Now, having said that, I think it probably is easier for people to get saved, but this leads to the other aspect, which is that God doesn't owe us salvation. He just, that's really all there is to it, right? He doesn't owe us these infinite chances or something like that. So it's not as if it's some huge like problem we have to reconcile with if it turns out that someone who never heard of Jesus halfway around the world actually ends up not getting saved based on that. Because, all right, God didn't owe, basically what I already said, God doesn't owe them salvation. And of course, in the case of someone who has every opportunity to read the Bible and chooses not to, absolutely God doesn't owe them salvation. So nowadays, when pretty much anyone can read the Bible, it doesn't apply at all. And that's basically, I think that's kind of all I would say, really. Like, basically, God's... So there's kind of like, I guess, three aspects to it. One, the idea as like some simple piece of information you need to know in order to get saved, I think is a little bit simplistic. I think in reality, there is a mechanism by which you can get saved, even if you don't know the full details of the gospel. Two, and like, by the way, like Jesus, I think literally got people saved just in like 5-minute conversations with them, where he never mentioned like the idea of like salvation or anything like that. It's just that the people who believed Jesus was capable of doing whatever, like the people who just had a general faith in the power of Jesus, that was enough to get them saved. The woman who just like reaches out, touches her cloak because she knows Jesus has the power to heal her. She didn't know anything about the Trinity. She didn't know anything about necessarily even Christ's divinity. She didn't know anything about Jesus Christ dying on the cross. Maybe she'd never even read the Bible before, or like the Old Testament. But she knew Jesus Christ had the power to heal her. And he says, your faith has made you well. So I believe absolutely 100% in that moment she gets saved. So you have these people who get saved just based on confidence and trust in Jesus without so much information. That's a good point. Yeah, exactly. Jesus saved one of the thieves on the cross, or rather, on the Golgotha. That's like the skull thing, isn't it? Isn't it pronounced Golgotha? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that, and there's also the fact that even if you're going to say, well, maybe some people don't get saved. Okay, well, God doesn't owe anyone salvation. And then there's the fact that nowadays this doesn't apply as an issue at all. And again, it's wildly speculative because we don't know how exactly God is going to deal with all these other people. I have heard it said that Jesus Christ preached to people in hell. I don't really know about that, but basically that there is some way of if you never heard, you get some kind of chance or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to get into it too much because you do get the whole thing of people trying to be oh, so there's a loophole, right? If I just move to some Amazonian uncontacted tribe, then I don't need to get saved and all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's that simple, but whatever. Anyway, I do need to go. But yeah, I think that idea, I don't think it's a super great argument. I'll read the final comments just because I see, I don't want to leave these final comments unaddressed. I remember loving him, but now I think his arguments are boring and low tier. Even atheists admit he's not the same hardcore atheist. Well, I would say that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You're saying atheists admit he's not the same hardcore atheist. In some contexts, obviously the fact he's a little bit almost willing to give Christianity so much charity means it's a bit boring and it's not. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But no, yeah, I would. In a way, I feel if you're an atheist who loved Alex O'Connor because he was an atheist, you'd be a little bit kind of bored by him. Not related to this video, but curious if you made any response to Sean Carroll. I've heard you be disappointed before in people not addressing the cosmological argument, and I think he does. I don't even know if I know who Sean Carroll is, so I'll have to look into that. My man. Oh yeah, no, it was a comment I would address. All right. Well, so I'm going to go, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next Monday, I believe. Bye, Zach. Bye, everyone else. Bye, Nevra Candlandi. Bye, Kleptomania. Bye, Radical Apologist. Bye, Matt Bab. Bye, Blake.